So there's a couple of really interesting events in the nuclear space that I wanted to get Kevin Kamps, our buddy at beyondnuclear.org, back on about. Kevin's an expert on all these things, and he's always such a wealth of information. Beyond Nuclear is also their Twitter handle. One is there's 3.5 million pounds of nuclear waste buried on a California beach. The other is that Fukushima wants to build a tunnel into the ocean so that they can get rid of their radioactive water without anybody seeing it or something. And then the third, of course, is we've got this giant piece of legislation, this $3.5 trillion bill, and the $500 billion bill, the so-called bipartisan bill. Is nuclear a part of these things as part of the solution to the climate crisis? Inquiring minds want to know, and Kevin Kamps is on the line with us. Kevin, welcome back. Let's start with the California beach. 3.5 million pounds of radioactive waste? Seriously?
It's true, but San Onofre, California is a microcosm of the national scene. I mean, I'm speaking to you from Kalamazoo, Michigan, about 40 miles from the Lake Michigan shore, and we've had many hundreds of tons of high-level radioactive waste just 150 yards from the waters of Lake Michigan, parked on a sand dune, very vulnerable to earthquakes, very vulnerable to historic high Lake Michigan water levels. And we've been fighting that for 30 years out there. So, yes, it's awful what's going on the Pacific coast, but there are equivalents around the country. Just name the state, and I can give you the local devilish details.
Had they just to keep this on San Onofre, if I'm forgive the mispronunciation, correct me if I'm wrong. How is this like barrels of 55-gallon drums of radioactive waste that are buried, or was it a giant pool that got plowed over? I mean, what's the deal here? How did this happen?
This is Holtec International, which got hired to do the high-level waste storage on site. And what they have is a mini version of what they want to do in New Mexico. They want to do a national version in New Mexico. So at San Onofre, what they have is a above-grade, above-ground concrete structure that has pits in it. And they lower these stainless steel canisters, which hold the high-level radioactive waste, into these pits. But it's 108 feet from the Pacific Ocean. It's like 1.5 feet above the high tide water level, with rising sea levels going on. It's near earthquake fault lines. It's in the tsunami zone. And I wrote a letter to the editor to the Los Angeles Times a few years ago that said, hey, look, okay, let's move it out of such a dangerous place, maybe a few miles inland to higher ground, deeper into the Camp and Marine Corps base, because the nuclear power plant is on the Marine Corps base. So you get it out of the flood zone, out of the earthquake fault lines. And bonus, you have several thousand U.S. Marines to help guard it against security risks. So move it a few miles instead of 1,000 miles to New Mexico or Texas.
And what was the response to your proposal? Crickets?
No response from officialdom other than to continue to push their legislation in Congress that would dump these wastes on the majority-minority state of New Mexico, on Latinx communities in West Texas, and even worse, perhaps, the transportation risks. Again, people of color, low-income communities live along those rail lines.
Yeah, inevitably. Tell me about what's going on at Fukushima. There's some new events going on there.
Less than 2 years from now, the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company plan to start dumping 1.27 million tons, which is like over 1 billion liters of highly radioactive wastewater into the Pacific Ocean for no good reason. And the news that's broken is that they want to dig a tunnel. And my question is, what do they have to hide? Do they not want television news crews filming them actually dumping this water into the ocean? They want to do it secretively. And what they've said the reason is they're concerned that just dumping it at the surface will allow it to concentrate near the shore or wash back to the shore. So apparently they want to dig a pipeline further out into the ocean to further dilute it. But dilution is a delusion. It's going to reconcentrate in the seafood supply, and humans are going to eat it. It's a really bad plan. They need to store it until the tritium decays to harmless levels, which will take about 125 years.
I mean, this is just a variation on what coastal cities have done for a couple of hundred years, isn't it? You know, you run a pipe a quarter mile out into the ocean and just dump your sewage through that pipe?
Yes, and actually there are some precedents in the nuclear industry which are shameful and abominable, like in France at the reprocessing facility La Hague, they dug a pipeline into the English Channel. In the UK itself, they dug a pipeline into the Irish Sea. The reason they did that from these reprocessing facilities is because if they were dumping this wastewater and solid waste and sludges in barrels off a boat, it would violate international law. So they found a loophole. We'll build a pipeline and we'll just dump it directly in the ocean. No barrels, no boats. So that's what the Japanese are doing. They're following the French and the British. And what they're doing is they are contaminating the world's ocean, the origin of life on this planet, the only life we know of yet in the cosmos.
Is this a done deal, Kevin? Or is there an indigenous, a local Japanese movement against it? Is this still a subject of debate in Japan?
It is not a done deal. In fact, the Japanese fishing cooperatives have led the effort. They are the little boy with his finger in the dike. For years now, they're trying to protect their livelihoods and protect the seafood supply. And they've been joined by the Japanese anti-nuclear movement, environmental movement, and the international environmental and ocean protection movement. So the fight is on, and we hope to stop it, but we're up against Japanese nuclear industry and government. We're up against the International Atomic Energy Agency. We're up against the U.S. government, the Biden administration, which has blessed this plan shamefully.
Wow. Now, I'm on your email list. We're talking with Kevin Kamps, a radioactive waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org, and they have a newsletter you can sign up for. It's free. You don't get spammed. They don't sell it. There's no ads. It's just pretty straightforward stuff. And I believe it was Linda authored a letter, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm doing this from memory here, suggesting that we need to be very, very careful that there are no nuclear bailouts in any of the so-called infrastructure bills that are being debated right now in Congress. What's the status of all that?
That was actually an effort led by Nuclear Information and Resource Service, but 250 groups signed on to this effort, including Beyond Nuclear. It was a letter to congressional leadership opposing massive nuclear power subsidies in the infrastructure bills that are before Congress. So just in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that has already passed the Senate, there was something like $12 billion in subsidies for old and new reactors. But in the budget reconciliation bill, there are proposals for something like $50 billion in nuclear power subsidies, mostly for old reactors. It's such a huge giveaway on top of, countless giveaways in the past to the nuclear power industry. It's going to benefit a handful of companies in a small number of states, in a small number of counties in this country. And as the executive director of NEARS pointed out, it will create a grand total of 0 new jobs. It's just to prop up these dangerously age-degraded, economically failed atomic reactors that already exist. If that money instead were to be invested in the real solutions to the climate catastrophe that's upon us, things like renewable energy, energy efficiency, grid modernization, energy storage, 60,000 new jobs would be created, according to the analysis prepared by NEARS and their expert, Dr. Mark Cooper.
Remarkable, remarkable. Kevin Kamps, a radioactive waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org. The Twitter handle is also at beyondnuclear. Kevin, thank you for dropping by. I always learn something. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Yeah, good talking with you. Keep up the great work.
You too.
Really important.